got Garrison working and involved in a social life, and Gabriel is also involved in
Welcome back to The Life with the Browns. Something unbelievable just happened, and even longtime viewers of the Brown family drama didn't see it coming. For weeks, people believed they were watching something rare, something genuine, something that almost never happens in the world of reality television. They thought they were watching Kody Brown finally break. They watched him cry. They watched him admit mistakes. They watched him talk about failing his children. And for a brief moment, many people believed the impossible, that Kody Brown was finally facing the truth.
But now
the entire story has completely collapsed. Because Kody Brown has just done something that shocked even the most skeptical fans. He stood in front of cameras during a television interview and casually admitted that the emotional breakthrough everyone saw wasn't real. Yes. According to Kody himself, that entire emotional moment viewers saw during his appearance on the intense reality competition Special Forces was basically an act. Not a spiritual awakening. Not a moment of personal accountability. Just a performance. When the interview aired on Fox 5 New York, it dropped like a bomb on the Sister Wives fandom. The interviewer asked Kody a simple question that most people expected him to answer with pride. Did the experience change you? Did you grow? Did you finally realize where you went wrong with your family? Instead of confirming the emotional transformation fans thought they saw, Kody casually shrugged off the entire moment. He explained that when you're in a military-style environment like the one on Special Forces, the protocol is to take responsibility for everything, even if it isn't completely your fault. So, according to him, that moment where he admitted failing his children, that wasn't a true realization. It was just part of the game. Let that sink in for a moment. Millions of viewers watched him sit across from trained interrogators. They saw a man who appeared emotionally shattered. His voice cracked. His eyes filled with tears. He admitted he didn't know how to be a good husband or a good father. For the first time in years, Kody Brown looked like someone who truly understood the damage he had caused. But now he's claiming that the entire thing was basically method acting. In other words, while viewers thought they were witnessing a deeply personal moment of accountability, Kody says he was simply playing along with what he believed military culture expected from him. A soldier takes the blame. A soldier owns everything. So Kody played the role. And just like that, the emotional scene that gave so many people hope suddenly looks completely different. Instead of a broken man confronting his past, it now appears to have been nothing more than a carefully performed character. But that's not even the most disturbing part of this entire situation. Because once the cameras stopped rolling and the Special Forces experience ended, Kody returned to the one place that always resets his reality. He went home. Home to the massive mansion he shares with Robyn Brown. And almost immediately, everything changed. The humble version of Kody that viewers briefly saw on Special Forces vanished almost overnight. The accountability disappeared. The self-reflection disappeared. And the blame? Well, that came roaring back. Suddenly, Kody began explaining that while he might share some responsibility for the breakdown of his family, the situation was far more complicated than people think. According to him, things only started falling apart after the divorces. Before that, he claims he had great relationships with all 18 of his children. But once the marriages ended, the children were forced to pick sides. And in Kody's version of events, most of them chose their mothers. So now, in his mind, the situation isn't really about his own actions anymore. It's about the complicated dynamics of polygamy and how difficult it becomes when relationships break down. Which is a very convenient explanation for someone who just recently cried on national television about failing as a father. And this is where Robyn Brown enters the story once again. Because many fans, and even some members of the Brown family, believe that Robyn's influence plays a much bigger role in Kody's behavior than he's willing to admit. For years, critics have argued that Robyn isn't just Kody's favorite wife. They believe she's the one quietly controlling the narrative. The one whispering in his ear. The one reinforcing the idea that he's the victim in all of this. When Kody is away from her, something interesting seems to happen. He softens. He reflects. He starts to show small glimpses of humility. But once he returns to the environment they've built together, that version of him disappears. And what replaces it is the Kody viewers have become painfully familiar with. The defensive Kody. The angry Kody. The Kody who believes everyone else destroyed the family except him. Janelle Brown once described the dynamic between Kody and Robyn in a way that perfectly captured what many people have been observing for years. She said the two of them are equally yoked. They feed off each other. Robyn plays the helpless victim. Kody steps in as the heroic protector. And together they create a reality where everyone outside their circle becomes the enemy. But while the adults argue and shift blame, there are other people caught in the middle of this emotional battlefield. The children. And that might be the most heartbreaking part of this entire story. Because when that Special Forces episode aired, some of Kody's kids actually believed their father was finally ready to change. They thought the man they saw crying on television might be the same man who could finally rebuild the relationships that have been shattered over the past several years.
But now
they're learning that the moment that gave them hope might not have been real at all. And that realization is going to leave wounds that may never fully heal. Now, let's rewind to the moment that had the entire Sister Wives fandom talking. Because when that episode of Special Forces aired, something happened that viewers had never seen from Kody Brown before. For nearly 2 decades, audiences had watched Kody argue, deflect blame, and lash out whenever anyone questioned his decisions. Whether it was his wives, his children, or the public, Kody always seemed to have an explanation for why none of it was truly his fault. But during that interrogation scene on Special Forces, everything appeared different. Kody was seated across from 2 men who specialize in breaking people down mentally and emotionally. These weren't reality show hosts trying to stir up drama. These were trained interrogators whose entire job is to strip away ego and force contestants to confront uncomfortable truths. As the questions became more intense, Kody started to crack. At first, he tried to explain himself the way he always does. He talked about how complicated his life had been, how managing a massive polygamous family had created impossible pressures. But the interrogators kept pushing. They didn't let him hide behind excuses. And slowly, the walls began to collapse. For the first time in Sister Wives history, viewers watched Kody Brown openly admit that he had failed the people who mattered most in his life. He said he didn't know how to be a good husband. He admitted he didn't know how to be the father his children needed. He even acknowledged something that fans had been saying for years, that he had become resistant to taking responsibility because he hated being blamed for everything. The moment felt raw,
real.
His voice shook as he spoke, his eyes filled with tears. And suddenly the man who had spent years defending himself looked completely broken. Social media exploded almost immediately after the episode aired. Longtime critics who had spent years calling Kody manipulative suddenly paused and said something no one expected. Maybe he's finally getting it. Maybe he's finally understanding the damage he caused. Because what made that moment feel so powerful was the setting. This wasn't happening on Sister Wives, where Kody has spent years controlling the narrative. It wasn't an edited conversation with producers who know how to shape scenes to fit a storyline. This was a brutal psychological environment designed to force people to confront themselves. And for a moment, it looked like Kody Brown had finally done exactly that. Viewers noticed something else that made the scene even more convincing. During the entire Special Forces experience, Kody didn't attack his ex-wives once. No bitter comments about Christine. No anger directed toward Janelle. No sarcastic remarks about Mary. And perhaps most surprising of all, he didn't lash out at his children. The Kody that fans have become used to, the angry, defensive version who says things like, "The way my kids feel about me is exactly how I feel about them," was nowhere to be seen. Instead, viewers saw a man who looked tired, humbled, almost human. For the first time in years, Kody wasn't acting like the patriarch defending his authority. He looked like a father who finally understood the emotional distance that had grown between him and his children. That's why the moment felt so significant. Because people believed it represented a turning point. Even some of Kody's own kids seemed to think the same thing. Michael T. Brown openly admitted that watching the episode made her reconsider the way she had been interacting with her father. She said that seeing him take responsibility made her want to respond to his phone calls again. That's huge. Because the Brown family fractures haven't just been dramatic storylines on television. They represent very real relationships that have been falling apart behind the scenes. And when children begin to believe their parent might finally be ready to change, hope starts creeping back into the picture. For Mykelti, that interrogation scene seemed like proof that her father might be ready to repair what had been broken. And she wasn't the only one who might have felt that way. There's Gwen, who once said something so heartbreaking that fans still talk about it. She said she couldn't even imagine what it would feel like to have a father who truly loved her. Think about that for a moment. A daughter who's grown up feeling so emotionally disconnected from her dad that the idea of being loved by him feels almost impossible to picture. Then there's Savannah. Sweet, patient Savannah, who has often found herself trying to comfort her siblings whenever conversations about their father turn painful. At one point, she told her sister something incredibly revealing. "He loves you," she said. "He's just mad at you for no reason." That's the level of emotional confusion these kids have been forced to navigate. They're constantly trying to explain behavior that doesn't make sense, trying to believe that anger doesn't mean absence of love, trying to convince themselves that the distance isn't permanent. So when their father appeared on television crying and admitting that he had failed them, it wasn't just entertainment. It felt like validation. It felt like the moment when everything might finally start changing. But then came the interview that destroyed that hope. When Kody sat down with Fox 5 New York and casually explained that he didn't actually have a breakthrough on special forces, the emotional impact of that admission was massive. Because suddenly that moment of vulnerability looked very different. Instead of a father realizing he had hurt his children, it now looked like a man performing a role he thought would fit the situation. According to Kody, he believed that in military environments you simply take responsibility for everything, even things that aren't fully your fault. So that's what he did. He leaned into the role. He said what he thought the interrogators expected him to say. And then he moved on. The problem with that explanation is obvious. If the emotional confession wasn't genuine, then the hope it created wasn't genuine either. Which means the children who believed they were finally seeing a different side of their father may have just been watching another performance. And that realization might hurt more than anything that came before. Because broken relationships are painful, but believing those relationships might heal, only to realize the change wasn't real, that kind of disappointment cuts much deeper. And the more fans analyze Kody's interview, the more one uncomfortable question keeps coming up. What happened between the moment he left Special Forces and the moment he sat down for that interview? Because something clearly shifted, and many people believe the answer leads right back to one person, Robyn Brown. By the time Kody Brown sat down for that interview in New York, something had clearly shifted. The man viewers had watched breaking down on Special Forces was suddenly gone. In his place was the familiar version of Kody that longtime fans recognize instantly, the defensive, self-justifying patriarch who always seems to find a way to spread the blame around. The interviewer asked a very direct question. Did you actually experience personal growth on the show? Did that emotional moment with the interrogators change anything for you? Kody's answer stunned people. Instead of describing a powerful breakthrough, he calmly explained that he didn't really have an epiphany at all. According to him, he simply believed that in a military-style environment you're supposed to accept responsibility for everything, whether it's your fault or not. So when the interrogators pushed him during that intense questioning scene, he leaned into that mindset. If you're partly responsible, he basically explained, then you take full responsibility. In other words, he treated the situation like a role, a performance, something you do because that's what the situation demands. For viewers who had spent weeks believing they witnessed a genuine emotional awakening, this explanation felt almost surreal. Because Kody wasn't saying the moment had been exaggerated by editing. He wasn't saying it was misunderstood. He was saying it wasn't real in the first place. That confession changed the entire meaning of the scene. Suddenly, what looked like a father realizing the pain he caused his children started to look like something very different, someone playing along with what he believed the interrogators wanted to hear. And Kody didn't stop there. During the interview, he began explaining that while he may carry some responsibility for the breakdown of his family, the situation is far more complicated than people realize. According to him, his relationships with his children were actually strong for most of their lives. The real turning point, he suggested, came after the divorces. Once the marriages ended, the children were placed in a difficult position where they felt pressured to choose sides. And in Kody's view, many of them naturally gravitated toward their mothers. So while he admitted there were mistakes on his part, he made it clear that the blame should not fall entirely on him. The responsibility, he implied, is shared with the ex-wives, with the complicated structure of polygamy, with the emotional chaos that comes when a plural marriage collapses in front of the entire world. For critics who have followed the Brown family for years, this explanation sounded painfully familiar. It's the same narrative that has been repeated over and over again. Yes, Kody may have made mistakes, but the real problem, according to him, is the environment around him, the wives, the circumstances, the pressure. Someone else always shares the blame. And that brings us to one of the most revealing moments that perfectly illustrates how this dynamic works. It happened during a conversation between Kody and Robyn on Sister Wives, and it involved one of his daughters, Aspen. Kody began telling Robyn about a recent interaction he had with Aspen that had clearly affected him emotionally. According to Kody, his daughter approached him with a heartbreaking question. She wanted to know why he seemed distant from her, why he didn't appear to like her anymore. Imagine the vulnerability in that moment. A daughter going to her father and asking, essentially, "What did I do wrong?" It wasn't an argument. It wasn't an attack. It was a plea for understanding. But the way that moment was reframed during Kody's conversation with Robyn revealed something incredibly important. As Kody described the situation, Robyn interrupted him and used a word that completely changed the tone of the story. She called it a confrontation. Not a conversation. Not a painful discussion. A confrontation. That single word subtly transformed the narrative. Instead of a daughter asking her father for reassurance, the situation suddenly sounded like someone challenging him, coming at him, putting him on the defensive. And that's the power of language. The moment you describe something as a confrontation, the emotional context shifts completely. The person asking the question becomes the aggressor. The person being questioned becomes the victim. Whether Robyn intended it or not, that simple word planted a new interpretation in Kody's mind. Now the moment could be seen not as a daughter reaching out, but as someone accusing him. And if Kody begins viewing these interactions as confrontations instead of cries for connection, it becomes much easier to dismiss the pain behind them. Suddenly the story isn't about a father who has drifted away from his children. It's about a man who feels attacked by people he believes should be supporting him. This kind of reframing has appeared many times throughout the history of the Brown family. Small changes in language, small shifts in perspective. But over time, those shifts can completely reshape how people interpret reality. And once someone begins seeing themselves as the victim of constant attacks, it becomes very difficult for them to recognize their own role in the conflict. For years, critics have suggested that this dynamic has played a huge role in the growing distance between Kody and many of his children. Because if every emotional conversation starts to feel like an accusation, then meaningful reconciliation becomes almost impossible. And unfortunately, that distance is already visible in the words of several of Kody's kids. Aspen once asked why her father seemed to dislike her. Gwen openly admitted that she struggles to imagine what it would feel like to have a father who genuinely loves her. Savannah has often found herself reassuring her siblings that their dad probably still cares about them, even if his actions sometimes suggest otherwise. Those are incredibly heavy emotional realities for any family to carry. And now, after Kody's interview revealed that his moment of accountability on special forces may not have been genuine, the situation feels even more complicated. Because if that breakdown wasn't real, then what exactly are his children supposed to believe now? Was that vulnerability genuine? Or was it simply another performance in a very long story of complicated family dynamics? And as this question spreads through the fandom, one thing is becoming increasingly clear. The emotional damage caused by these shifting narratives isn't just affecting television ratings. It's affecting real relationships. And the deeper you look into the Brown family's history, the more you begin to see how patterns of manipulation, miscommunication, and shifting blame have slowly reshaped the entire family structure. But if you really want to understand how this dynamic grew so powerful, you have to look at the strategy that many believe Robyn mastered better than anyone else in the family. A strategy that even Janelle Brown eventually called out. Because according to Janelle, Robyn figured out something about Kody that the other wives didn't realize soon enough. And once she understood it, the entire balance of power inside the Brown family started to change. If you really want to understand how the Brown family ended up here, you have to understand something Janelle Brown eventually realized after years inside that complicated marriage. At one point, Janelle sat down with friends and explained the dynamic between Kody and Robyn in a way that made everything suddenly make sense. She said the two of them are equally yoked. In other words, they feed off each other. And the way Robyn gained influence over Kody wasn't through open control. It was much more subtle than that. She gave him power. But in doing so, she actually gained far more control than anyone realized. It's a psychological strategy that has been discussed in books about power and influence for decades. Sometimes the easiest way to gain control over someone is to make them believe they're the one in charge. And according to Janelle, that's exactly what Robyn did. To understand how this worked, you have to look at the culture of polygamy the Browns came from. Women in that environment are taught two completely conflicting ideas. First, they're told their husband is essential to their spiritual future. In some interpretations of their faith, a husband is necessary for a woman's path to heaven. That creates a system where his authority carries enormous weight. But at the same time, plural wives are also expected to be incredibly independent. Because one husband can't realistically be everywhere at once. With multiple homes and dozens of children, each wife has to manage her own household. She has to solve her own problems. She has to handle her responsibilities without constantly relying on the husband. For years, Christine, Janelle, and Mary followed that model. They ran their homes. They raised their kids. They fixed their problems without constantly asking Kody for help. They had to. But Robyn approached the situation very differently. Instead of projecting independence, she positioned herself as someone who constantly needed Kody's support. If something broke, she called him. If something needed to be moved, she called him. If a decision had to be made, she wanted him involved. At first glance, it might have looked like she simply valued his leadership. But over time, it created a completely different dynamic. While the other wives were functioning independently, Robyn was creating situations where Kody felt essential. He felt needed, important, like the hero of the household. And for someone like Kody, that feeling was incredibly powerful, because being the center of attention has always been something he clearly thrives on. So while the other wives were managing their lives without constantly depending on him, Robyn was making sure he felt indispensable. She even gave him something none of the other wives had done before: an office inside her home, a space that symbolically placed him at the center of her household. It reinforced the idea that he was the leader there, the protector, the provider. And slowly but surely, that environment began pulling him closer and closer to Robyn's world. Janelle described the dynamic perfectly. She said Robyn plays the role of the damsel in distress, and Kody happily puts on the cape and rides in like the hero. On the surface, it looks romantic, but underneath, it creates a powerful cycle of emotional reinforcement. Robyn gets Kody's constant attention. Kody gets the ego boost of feeling needed, and the other wives slowly fade into the background. Over time, that imbalance began reshaping the entire structure of the Brown family. But Robyn's influence didn't stop there, because even after the marriages began collapsing, Kody continued using another tactic that had helped him maintain control for years: divide and conquer. For a long time, Kody managed relationships with his wives by keeping them separated emotionally. He would tell one wife something different from what he told another. He would frame conflicts in ways that made each woman believe the others were the problem. As long as the wives were frustrated with each other, they weren't focusing on him. And for many years, that strategy worked. But eventually something changed. Mary and Janelle started communicating more directly. They compared notes. And what they discovered was shocking. Stories didn't line up. Promises had been different depending on who Kody was talking to. Narratives had been adjusted in ways that benefited him. Once the wives started sharing information openly, the illusion began to fall apart. And nowhere was that more obvious than during the conflict over the Coyote Pass property. At one point, Kody claimed he had almost made a private deal with Janelle to sell the property quickly, even if it meant leaving Mary and Robyn out of the decision. The way he told the story made it sound like Janelle had been pushing for a backdoor deal. But Janelle strongly rejected that version of events. She said she never wanted to cheat anyone. She wanted a fair outcome for everyone involved. In fact, instead of working against Mary, Janelle eventually became one of her strongest allies during the property negotiations. Together, they fought for equal treatment. And in doing so, they prevented Kody from pushing through a deal that many believed would have favored him and Robyn. Once again, the divide and conquer strategy collapsed. Because when the wives stopped competing with each other and started communicating directly, Kody's ability to manipulate the narrative disappeared. That's why you still see him trying to plant seeds of distrust even today. By suggesting Janelle wanted a secret deal, he subtly attempts to make Mary question their alliance. But this time it didn't work. Mary openly acknowledged that Janelle had stood beside her during the fight. They may not be best friends, but they recognized that they were facing the same problem. And once they united, Kody lost one of the most powerful tools he had relied on for years. But there's another strange detail that reveals just how much influence Robyn still has over Kody. And oddly enough, it involves something as simple as facial hair. It might sound trivial, but in the world of polygamy, even small things like a husband's appearance can signal which wife holds the most influence. When Kody changes something about his look to please one wife, everyone notices. And recently, viewers watched a moment that made this dynamic painfully obvious. Robyn complained that Kody's facial hair was uncomfortable when he kissed her. She said it was too pokey. Instead of brushing it off, Kody immediately offered to shave it completely if it meant she would be more affectionate with him. He practically lit up at the idea. The promise of more kisses, more affection, more closeness. And Robyn responded with exaggerated excitement, promising that if he shaved it off, they'd be kissing constantly. It almost looked playful. But to longtime observers, it revealed something deeper. Because this wasn't just about facial hair. It was about control. It showed how easily Kody adjusts himself to meet Robyn's preferences, while the opinions of the other wives seemed to carry far less weight. And moments like that reinforced the perception many fans already have. That despite everything that has happened, despite the divorces, the family conflicts, and the estranged relationships with many of his children, Kody's world has become smaller, more isolated, centered almost entirely around one person, Robyn Brown. And while the two of them sit inside their massive mansion trying to rebuild their version of the family, the emotional fallout continues spreading through the lives of the children who grew up in that complicated household. Which brings us to the most painful part of this entire story. Because while the adults argue about blame, responsibility, and who manipulated who, the children are the ones left carrying the deepest scars. And the things some of them have said about their relationship with their father are almost impossible to hear without feeling the weight of that damage. Now we come to the part of this story that's the hardest to talk about. Because while adults argue about blame, manipulation, and who destroyed the Brown family, there are people caught in the middle of all this who never asked to be part of the conflict. The children. And the things some of them have said over the years reveal just how deep the damage really goes. When that emotional interrogation scene aired on Special Forces, something unexpected happened. Some of Kody's kids actually felt a small spark of hope. For years, their relationship with their father has been strained, distant, and filled with unresolved pain. Many of them had stopped expecting any real accountability from him. But watching him break down on national television felt different. For the first time in a long time, it looked like he might finally understand what his absence had done to them. Mykelti even admitted that seeing her dad take responsibility during that scene made her consider returning his calls. Think about that for a moment. One emotional confession was enough to make a daughter believe that maybe, just maybe, her father was finally ready to repair the relationship. But now that Kody has publicly admitted that moment may not have been genuine, the emotional consequences of that revelation are devastating. Because hope is a powerful thing. And when hope gets taken away, the disappointment cuts even deeper. Some of the statements that have come from Kody's children over the years are absolutely heartbreaking. At one point, Aspen reportedly asked him a question that no child should ever have to ask their parent. Why don't you like me? Not why are we fighting? Not why are we distant? But why don't you like me? That question alone says more about the emotional gap between them than any reality show episode ever could. Then there's Gwen, who once said something that stunned viewers. She said she couldn't even imagine what it would feel like to have a father who genuinely loved her. Let that sink in. A daughter who has grown up feeling so disconnected that the concept of her father's love feels almost impossible to picture. And then there's Savannah. Savannah has often found herself trying to comfort her siblings when the topic of their father becomes painful. At one point, she tried to reassure her sister by saying something incredibly sad but strangely hopeful at the same time.
He loves you, she said.
He's just mad at you for no reason. Imagine the emotional confusion behind that sentence. A child trying to explain a parent's behavior that doesn't make sense. Trying to believe that anger doesn't mean rejection. Trying to convince herself that the love is still there somewhere, even if it's buried under years of distance and resentment. These kids have spent years trying to make sense of something that shouldn't be this complicated. And while they're struggling to understand their father, Kody sits inside his mansion with Robyn, convinced that he's the one who has been wronged. Convinced that his children turned against him. Convinced that the family fell apart because everyone else broke their commitments. That belief system didn't appear overnight. It was built slowly, reinforced by years of shared narratives between Kody and Robyn. Many critics now describe Robyn as the final obstacle standing between Kody and reconciliation with his children. Some fans even jokingly refer to her as the final boss of the Brown family saga. Not because she openly blocks the relationships, but because of the way she reframes every situation. When children reach out emotionally, it becomes a confrontation. When wives demand fairness, it becomes betrayal. When the family falls apart, it becomes proof that everyone else failed spiritually. Robyn often frames their situation through the language of destiny and faith. When something good happens, it's presented as a blessing. When something bad happens, it's often described as the result of someone else breaking their covenant. That narrative is incredibly powerful, because once you believe your situation is guided by destiny, it becomes very difficult to question the choices that led you there. And Kody appears to believe it completely. He believes their mansion represents a reward. He believes their relationship represents divine purpose. And if that's true in his mind, then anyone challenging that story automatically becomes the problem. But here's the strange twist that many fans can't stop thinking about. When Kody was away from Robyn during his time on Special Forces, something about him seemed different. He wasn't angry. He wasn't bitter. He wasn't attacking his ex-wives or his children. For a brief moment, viewers saw a version of Kody that felt almost unfamiliar. A quieter version. A more reflective version. A man capable of admitting mistakes. That's why the scene felt so powerful. Because it suggested that somewhere underneath the defensive personality fans have watched for years, there might still be a father who wants to make things right. But the moment he returned home, that version of Kody seemed to disappear. The defensiveness returned. The blame returned. And now, after publicly admitting that his emotional breakdown might have been nothing more than playing a role, the fragile hope that scene created has been shattered. The sad reality is that reconciliation becomes nearly impossible when two people reinforce each other's worst instincts. Janelle once described Kody and Robyn as being perfectly matched in that way. They validate each other. They protect each other's version of events. And together they create a reality where everyone outside their circle becomes the enemy. As long as that dynamic exists, the distance between Kody and many of his children may only continue to grow, which leads to the question that fans keep asking. Will Kody ever break free from that mindset? Will he ever rebuild the relationships that have been damaged over the years? Or has the divide grown too wide to repair? Only time will answer that. But one thing is certain. The Brown family story is far from over. The drama, the complicated relationships, the emotional fallout, it's all still unfolding in real time. And people around the world are still watching, still trying to understand how one family that once claimed to represent unity ended up so divided. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think Kody will ever repair his relationships with his children? Or do you believe the influence around him is simply too strong? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you made it this far into the video, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned, because the next chapter of the Brown family story might be even more shocking than the last. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one on Life with the Browns.